Every afternoon, as they were coming home from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a lovely garden, with soft green grass. Here and there, over the grass, stood beautiful flowers, like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that, in the springtime, broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and, in the autumn, bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen. "How happy we are here," they cried together. One day, the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, and had stayed with him for 7 years. After the 7 years were over, he had said that all he had to say, for his conversation was limited and he was determined to return to his own castle. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried, in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant. "Anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself." So he built a huge wall all around it and put up a notice board. "Trespassers will be prosecuted." He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had nowhere to play. He tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they didn't like it. They used to wander around the high wall when their lessons were over and talk about how beautiful the garden was inside. How happy they were there, they said to each other. And then spring came, and all over the country there were beautiful little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant, it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Only a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw the notice board, it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten about this garden," they cried, "so we will live here all year round." The snow covered up the grass with a great white cloak, and the frost painted all of the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs. He roared all day about the garden and blew the chimney pots down. "This is a delightful spot," he said. "We must ask the hail on a visit." And so the hail came every day for 3 hours. He rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates. And then he ran around and around the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in grey, and his breath like ice. "I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming," said the selfish giant, as he sat at the window and looked out at this cold, white garden. "I hope there will be change in the weather." But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but the giant's garden gave none. "He is too selfish," she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning, the giant was laying awake in his bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it might have been the king's musicians playing and passing outside. But it was really only a little linnet singing outside his window. But it was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden that he seemed to him that it was the most beautiful music in the world. And then the hail stopped, dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. "I believe spring has come at last," said the giant, and he jumped out of the bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw the most wonderful sight. through a little hole in the wall where the children had crept in. And they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see, there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back, and they covered themselves with blossoms, and they were waving their arms gently with the children's heads. And the birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene. Only in one corner was it still winter. It was the farthest corner from the garden, and in it, standing a little boy. He was so small that he could not reach to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all around it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still covered with frost and snow, and a north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, boy," said the tree, as it bent its branches down as low as it could, but the boy was too tiny. And the giant's heart melted as he looked out. "How selfish I have been," he said, "and now I know why the spring would not come here. I will put that little boy on top of the tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever." And he was really sorry for what he had done. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly and went into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy didn't run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand, and he put him up to that tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom. And the birds came and sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his arms and flung them around the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back. With them came spring. "It is your garden now, little children," said the giant. And he took a great axe and knocked down the wall, and when people were going to the market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye. "But where is your little companion?" he said. "The boy I put in the tree?" The giant loved him the best because he had kissed him. "We don't know," answered the children. "He has gone away. You must tell him to be sure to come here tomorrow." But the children said they did not know where he lived, and he had never seen him before. The giant felt very sad. Every afternoon when the school was over, the children came and played with the giant, but the little boy who loved the giant was never seen again. The giant was very kind to all of the children, and yet he longed for his little friend, and often spoke of him. "How I would love to see him," he used to say. Years went over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He couldn't play anymore, so he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children at their games, and he admired the garden. "I have so many beautiful flowers," he said, "but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all." One winter morning, he looked out of his window and he saw his dressing. He didn't hate winter now, for he knew that it was merely the springs asleep, and that the flowers were resting. Suddenly he rubbed his eyes in wonder and looked, and it was certainly a marvelous sight. In the furthest corner of the garden was a tree covered with lovely white blossoms. Its branches were all golden, and silver fruit hung down from them. Underneath it stood the boy he loved. Downstairs ran the giant in great joy. And out into the garden he hastened across the grass, and he came near to the child. And when he came quite close, his face grew red with anger, and he said, "Who hath dared to wound thee?" For on the palms of the child's hands were 2 prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were on the little feet. "Who dared wound thee?" cried the giant. "Tell me, that I may take my big sword and slay him." "Nay," answered the child, "but these are wounds of love." "Who art thou?" said the giant. A strange awe fell upon him, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled onto the giant, and he said to him, "You let me play in your garden today. You shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." And when the child ran in that afternoon, they found the giant laying dead underneath the tree covered in white blossoms.